and welcome to the Shame Free Zone. My guest today is a friend of mine. It's not like we're friends that hung out. We're friends that have a common mission in life. We both want to open up the conversation around sex. And Monica Thomas and I started collaborating about a decade ago. It might actually be a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But she actually got her start as a radio announcer. And then I invited her to join a network that I had helped to found with my friend, Mary Lou. And that network is called Sex Talk Radio Network. We really wanted to target women and couples and bring in a conversation about sexuality that was holistic and healing and uplifting. And okay, Monica, I'm just so glad that you're here in my shame-free zone. And
I love being in your shame-free zone. We all need a shame-free zone everywhere, all the time. Turn it on right now.
Oh, yes, we need a shame-free planet. So I was really intrigued and excited to hear that you were starting to look into things around sacred sexuality. But before we go there, maybe we need to backtrack a little bit and just kind of contextualize that, because I know you and I are both survivors. And this could be kind of a fraught territory for people who have suffered any kind of sexual assault. And since the advent of Me Too, we know a lot of women have had, if not assault, at least harassment and things that have created certain levels of trauma. So tell us a little bit about your journey around that.
So there's a lot, but what I realized after the third time of being date raped is that men are taught, and people are taught, I should say, in sexuality, don't take no for an answer, be assertive. And a lot of times, more of the receiver action is to, always be nice and don't say what you want. And 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 both of us are not really talking openly and explicitly about what we really feel safe doing. And a lot of the times we can feel rushed. And ultimately, I became a sexual health educator and taught healthy relationship classes at City College. And that was really eye-opening for me, especially because I taught a men's health class. And we were doing the healthy relationship program. And I would say about half of the men lost their virginity to sexual assault. And maybe they didn't call it rape at the time, but they didn't want to have sex and someone kind of coerced them into it. Or they felt like, I'm supposed to want this. I don't want to say no. Maybe it kind of impinges on my masculinity. And so if that's the culture that we're living in, then I really think we have to look more at, like, how do we ask for what we want? How do we listen to our partner? And, what is sex about, right?
Yes. Well, thank you for laying that out for us, because that's also something that I've observed. It's almost as if there's like somebody handed us a script and said, okay, if you have a penis, you'll play this part. And if you have a vagina, you'll play that part. And of course, there are some people who maybe have different genitalia, but have still enrolled in that part.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm talking about the dominant system, which was really oriented towards genitalia. Let's face it, that's kind of like what they look at. And so fast tracking people into these roles where it's almost choreographed before you get to the dance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I
a lot of times, because our role or how we're seen plays so much into how people think they can treat us and a lot of things, that sometimes our voice and our agency isn't really heard. And how can we make sure that we're really listening to each other so we can have pleasurable sex? Like, I think that we can end the battle of the sexes just by making sure that everybody is having an orgasm. maybe, or something like that, or pleasure, right? Maybe not orgasm exactly, but like the pleasure that you want to have. So, I think we can start at least asking what feels good to you. What do you want?
Yeah. And I think it's important. I used to hang out, taught classes. I wasn't a member of this place, but One Taste, I'm sure you heard of it.
Oh, I do know One Taste. Yeah.
There was a cult-like atmosphere there, and it was very much preaching that orgasms would change the world. And I'm not completely adverse to that message, but it obviously didn't work for them.
And they have a different definition of orgasm too, right?
True.
Right.
Well, and it was compulsory.
Right. Yes.
So,
and you're like, oh, we're going to force you into being sexually free. It's going to be so great.
How does that work?
Well, yeah. And then the whole kind of, they have some seduction things. And, this happens with a lot of the people that came out of that program. So Morehouse, and then all of the orgasmic meditations, doing all that stuff came out of the same
Welcome
thing.
Consensus is right
Precisely.
in there too.
And they have, like a thing about like women need to be convinced to have sex. And personally, I think that that's pretty dangerous.
I think it's misogynistic.
Right. Like you should decide for yourself if you want to have sex, like, or if you want to have pleasure, right? If you don't want to have pleasure, I think you should just be left alone and enjoy embroidery.
There are people who are asexual.
Whatever you enjoy. Gardening.
I know, right? Monica, it reminds me of when I was escorting from 89 to 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And clients would show up, and they're very sweet. They wanted to please me. I had a very worshipful, devoted following, which I have a great appreciation for. But at the same time, it was coming from so much male entitlement.
Yeah.
So it's like, what would you like me to do? And I'm like, really, my feet are killing me. Could you rub them?
Totally.
And they're like, well, what else would you like me to do?
Right.
And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
You're not listening to what I actually want.
Right.
So there's a lot of that going around. And I'm really glad that we contextualize this conversation with that at the forefront, because I think it's just so important to know that no means no. And also there's so many things that relate into date rape. So I've been date raped twice and raped once by a serial rapist. So I'm a survivor 3 times too.
Yeah. And what is really disturbing, especially what I've heard in the sex work community, is that there are people who prey on sex workers because they are, I don't know exactly how to say this.
They're easy targets, and I'll tell you why.
The police don't seem to really value their lives. Like sex worker lives don't matter. And it's like, why is that okay?
Yes, I don't know if you know, but yesterday was December 17th. I was there for the very first day of Remembrance with Rob.
Oh, with the red umbrellas?
Yes, the very first one. We had it right in front of San Francisco City Hall.
Yeah.
Robin Few, who has since passed on, was the one that got that going. It was Annie Sprinkle's idea.
Yeah, I love Annie Sprinkle.
Oh, I do too. And we borrowed the red umbrellas from Australia. They told us,
okay,
now it's spread everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's true. Actually, the serial rapist that raped me was preying on probably 10 to 20 prostitutes a month. And
That's just disturbing that he could get away with that at that level.
3 weeks after he raped me, he stabbed a young girl in the face with a knife. So this was a violent person. And
rape is violent too.
Well, it is. Thank you for that correction. I stand corrected, Monica. Thank you.
No. We're both like,
no, but isn't that one of the things that we do?
Right. Yeah. We're like, well, it wasn't that bad,
Oh,
minimizing, right? Like not feeling our own, like,
yeah.
especially when something happens to me, like I minimize it. I'm like, well, I'm sure that I brought that on myself somehow. We victim blame our own selves. And how do we, both let go of our suffering around it, but also like move into a place of transformative justice where we can start to really connect with and start to re-educate perpetrators.
Oh, Monica, I just watched the most beautiful online event with the elders, Nelson Mandela's elders.
Oh,
And the former president of Colombia was talking about transformative justice. Now,
yeah.
I've become very familiar with restorative justice. Transformative
Yeah.
justice is a
Hmm.
little different. Can you say more about that?
Truly. Yeah. Um, okay. So I can't remember which one is the good one. I think transformative justice was first and then restorative justice was second.
Okay.
And so restorative justice is to bring the perpetrator back into the community to retrain them. So instead of just, locking them in prison and throwing away the key, you actually retrain someone like how to listen for soft no's. And my friend Read Mihalko of readaboutsex.com,
Good friend of mine too.
yeah, so he got into a situation where he needed to be accountable for his misunderstanding and truly accidentally assaulting someone by receiving, like, kind of asking for a hand job and not listening to her soft nose, right? And so he stopped doing sex education for a year and like had like a whole accountability team and really like re-educated himself about like how to make sure that he never does this again, and also how to teach people as a sex educator how they in colleges and all around the country can make sure that they're not, that people aren't doing it again, that we relearn how to ask for consent and listen to people's no's, soft no's, suggestions,
Well,
desires.
Reid has a beautiful heart, and
Yeah.
I consider him one of my go-tos when it comes to consent. I just feel like he's a huge. I mean, he helped co-found Cuddle Party, so
Yeah.
that was all about consent.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, before we segue into sacred sexuality, I think it'd be really important if you could share something about how it was for you to go from being a rape survivor to somebody who's celebrating your sexuality. So many people don't make that journey. What
Hmm.
steps did you take to get there?
Well, I was I was pretty young when I was assaulted, and I was assaulted multiple times. So I started to see, like, in the culture, how it wasn't just me and these a couple incidents. It was like a whole systemic thing. And I like saw the whole cycle in my head. And it was like, whoom, this is happening to everyone. And so then to me, it became an emergency to like really talk about it and really be accountable. And I actually mm, requested from the man who assaulted me, whom I know assaulted other colleagues of mine at the radio station. I asked him to sign something that was very positive, but that was very clear about making sure that you're listening and asking questions, and basically in sparkly pink pen, and he signed it in sparkly blue pen, I will never sexually assault anyone ever again. I was like, okay, right, like, so that's my early journey. And then
What?
later
That,
on,
that, that is amazing. How did you? That's amazing. How old
it
were you?
just kind of occurred to me because I wanted to communicate to this person in a way that would be remembered to him, and also to have something to keep, so that I could, because the other thing is after I was sexually assaulted, I couldn't even have consensual sex for about 6 months. I was a yes to having sex with this beautiful man in front of a fireplace, roaring fire. And the two of us are sweaty and making out. And he had beautiful blonde curls. And it was magical. It was a magical moment. But my vagina was all like, I'm closed. There's nothing happening here. There's like a smooth outside, and it's called vaginismus. And it happens,
Oh
but my
yes.
vagina was just like, no, we're not doing this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so that
So
must have been kind of a scary, or I'm thinking demoralizing,
it
frustrating.
was just surprising,
Okay.
it was just like, oh, and since it was a one night stand, really, or I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have been a one night stand if I could have done it. Who knows what happened,
Okay.
because you're young. I mean, I was 20 and I probably couldn't communicate, or, it was before having a radio show about sex. I just had a radio show, right? And it hadn't occurred to me. So what it occurred to me had to have a radio show about sex when I was reading Dossie Easton's Ethical Slut. And this book by one of the Singh Khalsas, I think it's Satsur Khalsa, and it was called The Technology of Orgasm. And so it was this book about Tantra and this book about the ethical slut. And so together I was like, wow, there's so much that we don't know and that we're not talking about sex. And this was, of course, during the Howard Stern days, where he was making huge ratings, just being so crass on the
Oh,
radio. And
yes,
I was
it
like,
was.
right? Like
Ugh.
super crass, like drugs bouncing and like not, and porn stars and blah, and not, porn stars are sex educators, but wouldn't it be amazing if we had conscious porn stars doing conscious sex education, right? Wouldn't that be
Well, I could think of a few, like Annie Sprinkle and Nina
totally?
Hartley anyway, yeah.
No, it's happening. It's happening
Jessica Drake
more.
too. Jessica Drake has a whole line of
Mm-hmm.
educational, enlightening videos.
Yeah. So during that time, I just thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing to, I mean, not only would you be changing the world, but you would be learning and then having a great time doing it. So that's why I started Sexploration with Monica, is because I wanted to change the world and have fun doing it and learn a lot. And of course, I thought that having a radio show about sex would make me wildly rich and famous. And, I have, a bunch of listeners all over the world, and it's pretty good. I haven't found a way to get paid a huge amount of money from talking about sex on the radio, mostly because radio stations are like, you can't talk about sex,
It's so true. It's so true. It's interesting how the radio stations haven't caught up with the internet.
Yeah.
I feel like they're putting themselves out of business.
They
So
truly
you
are.
sound like you were an incredibly present and empowered young woman.
Oh, thank you.
When you confronted your rapist. And,
Mhm.
I'm reading a fabulous book right now. It's called South of Forgiveness. And it's about a woman and a man who were in love, but he date raped her.
Mm.
And she was very young at the time. And it had an incredibly impactful, I mean, it was just a lot of trauma put into her body around that. And years later, they start communicating via email. And then they met in South Africa to create forgiveness. So it's a fascinating, they did a TED talk about it, actually.
Oh, you mean it's a real story?
It's a real story.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow, that's really deep.
Yes, I kind of feel like we are in a time when these stories are surfacing and we're looking for healing. So I'm wondering, do you think, it seems to me like you did a little bit of restorative justice for yourself. Do you think that your perpetrator got it and went forward and didn't perpetrate again? What's your, I mean, there's no way of
That's
knowing.
a good question.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because I didn't follow up with him and like interrogate him, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
I don't think I'm even friends with him on Facebook. I know that he got married and he had kids. So ideally he settled down, you know, like he's not the young man that he was. I think one of the things that really inspired me is that I I don't know. I think I just knew that he had done this to my other colleague at the radio station.
Oh,
And that's why I was so galvanized to really make sure that I communicated with him. Because the thing is if we don't communicate about what happens to us and we don't speak for ourselves, then that learning moment in some like way that we've been wronged is lost. You know, like your opportunity to say, even if you can't do it right away, like even if you do it years later, like I know that a lot of people started communicating with their rapist during the Me Too movement.
mhm.
And that hit a lot of people really hard because it was this ocean of survivors who just came back like a tsunami and started taking out the Harvey Weinsteins of the world all at the same time. So that was a, you know, like that was a whole thing. I
That
mean,
was a cultural sea change. It really was. And I think it was so important to elevate women's voices and women's perspective because we've had millennia of our voices being suppressed and our experiences being silenced.
mhm,
So, but would you agree that the shaming, like a lot of women had felt ashamed about being assaulted.
mhm.
So then at one point, it was actually Tarana Burke who said this. She was the founder of the hashtag Me Too. She said, well, the shame is finally being placed where it belongs, which is with the men.
On the
And
perpetrator.
she ended up retracting that about a year later. And I think that I'm glad that she did because I feel that shame is toxic. And
Mhm.
it's been my experience because I work with people who have trouble with perpetrations, and shame leads to re-perpetration. So
Right. Because you're
actually want to
not
try to heal the shame
right.
so that we can all be safer.
Right. Like how to not be a perpetrator, like rather than how to pretend it didn't happen or how not to talk about it, like don't ask for help.
Yeah.
So in that way, yeah, shame doesn't actually have a positive effect.
So let's talk some about your explorations, sexplorations
My sex explorations.
around sacred sex. First of all, some of the viewers may not even know what sacred sex is, and of course, it's different things to different people. So just kind of give us a window into your journey through that.
So most recently, the reason that I was super hopped up on sacred sex is because I got the opportunity to throw a bondage dinner in a cathedral. I
Woo!
know. It was
What?
like,
Which cathedral?
um, it's the Lady Guadalupe Cathedral in North Beach. It's
Oh yes.
just a beautiful space, and now it is basically a nonprofit. And so we had a 5-course bondage dinner with tantra and BDSM and art performances and a latex fashion show. It was just
Wow.
mind-bogglingly awesome.
Yeah.
And, you know, a cabaret and Rain DeGrey performed, and I mean, just star-studded acts from the sex positive community. Shy performed. It was just delightful and sparkly. And so what I learned was that both BDSM and Tantra can be portals into transcendent experiences where you're so focused in the present moment that the world falls away, your mind falls away. And this is a way for us to experience the divine both in each other and in ourselves. So we let go of the ego, we're only focused in the present moment. And transcendence is possible. And knowing how to get there, like using the tools of either Tantra or safe and sane BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochism.
Yes, maybe just take a couple of seconds here to explain what safe, sane, and consensual BDSM. What is it?
Okay. So BDSM is a practice of kinky sex. So it could be flogging or caning or even electrocution. I've been set on fire and it's thrilling, shockingly thrilling. They put it right out so that it like only burns like just the moisture from the top layer of your skin, and there might be a little bit of burning hair. But anyway, it's so exciting. It's very stimulating to your sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And that's what BDSM is. It's extremely stimulating to your sympathetic nervous system. And so when in orgasm, we're trying to stimulate both your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system is the part of you that's like, oh, this is so exciting. Oh, we're having sex. Ooh, she looks so good. He looks so good. Oh, I can't wait to. And then your parasympathetic nervous system is your sympathetic, is your feeling like relaxation and safety and pleasure. Like, oh, that feels so good. And oh, I feel so safe. And oh, I'm so relaxed. And that's so delicious. And so when you can stimulate both of those sides of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, then you can have an orgasm. And then you can also, depending on your orgasmic training or focus, you can have lots of different kinds of orgasms. And then there are transcendent states available.
Yes, I actually had Dr. Jenny Wade on here talking about transcendent sex a couple months ago.
Woo!
So there's so many ways to get there. And I think we just circling back to BDSM, I want to make sure that there's also bondage and discipline,
right?
Sadomasochism, so which is pain, inflicting pain or receiving pain,
right? And the importance of consent, right? You can say, red for stop everything, let's get some cocoa and have a conversation, or yellow, which is I don't actually like what we're doing now, and could we please move on? And then there's green, which is like, woo, everything's golden, bring it on.
Well, as a former pro-dom, I tell you that the person who is supposedly submitting to your power is really in charge.
Oh, totally. Well, and that should be true, right?
You are there to serve them. You're there to serve them.
When someone is so vulnerable and tied up, they should be the bottom line. And there's practices like, consensual non-consent, which I find, very difficult. And I think that should only be for very advanced, very conscious people, because even the most advanced of us, like Melina Williams, who's a sex educator and a very experienced bottom, like even she can get into situations where her previous trauma takes over her ability to communicate, and then she freezes, or she meets, maybe an inner aspect that is paralyzed with fear and can't speak. And so sometimes even the pros have trouble with really edgy play.
Oh, yes. And I think what you're highlighting is so crucial, because we need to know that culturally women have adopted attend and befriend So a lot of times they're trying to protect maybe their children. That's where the tend comes from, and befriend somebody who might harm them or their children. So that's kind of like ingrained in our DNA. And then you've got something, a fear response. It's actually one of the freeze responses, which goes way into freeze, and it's called tonal immobility. And about 97% of all rape victims have, or rape survivors, this is a term I prefer, have actually experienced tonal immobility, where they can't move,
frozen,
can't talk.
and
Can't
you
even
don't
think.
react or speak or,
Yeah.
and as long as you survive an experience of assault, then it doesn't matter what your body or your mind decided to do in the moment.
So
It
true.
doesn't make you wrong.
No, it's, I had self-defense. And when I ran into that serial rapist, I didn't know that he was prone to violence, but everything inside me said, just do what he says. And I
Right.
was surprised. Why didn't I fight back? I went
Right.
into another coping mechanism in the amygdala. It's a fear response, which is fawning. I praised him and tried to get along with him. And then as soon as I got out the door, I'm like having all kinds of but I was
Right.
actually imprisoned in his place. He would lock women in. You couldn't get out.
Oh,
So you just do it, whatever you can,
to get
to make
out
sure that this person
safely.
doesn't hurt you and that you can get out of there, hopefully.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And when I found out that this 18-year-old prostitute was stabbed in the face just 3 weeks after my encounter with him, I was like,
Maybe
thank
that was
God.
your
I
subconscious, like feeding you information to keep you safe.
totally was so glad that I actually had that in my toolbox.
Yeah.
so, so
You're like, thanks, brain.
surviving is a good thing.
No, it's really important. And then you can
Yeah.
I believe that we're all infinite anyway, and we're all little pieces of God trying to figure out what it is to be divine.
Hmm.
But I think that living through this lifetime, even though, maybe ultimately we're not gonna, but let's try to get as old and as wise as we can so that we can teach all the other monkeys how to be pleasure bonobos instead of angry little capitalists.
Or angry chimpanzees. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and where people can find your radio program.
Yeah. Okay. So not only am I a real estate agent, so getrealestate.us is how I make my money.
Got it?
And my passion in life, I mean, I do enjoy the complexity in navigating a real estate deal, and especially in San Francisco. It's kind of fun
Oh,
and big
cool.
stakes. And then,
I'll bet.
it's cool. But what I'm really passionate about and what I'd really like to be supported by and support the world doing is Sexploration with Monica, which is my sex positive feminist podcast. And I love having, evolved masculinists on it as well. And I'm absolutely pro ending the battle of the sexes. And I love exploring transcendence, certainly, because my mantra for the pandemic, I'm single, so it's meditate, masturbate, rinse, repeat, because like, what are you gonna do with work from home? Like, try to get in touch with your transcendent selves and like really meditate, and then take a shower and then do it again.
There you go. There you go. And that is an important thing, that you can actually have that transcendent experience through self-pleasuring. You don't
Right.
have to have a partner. Although in my sacrosexual take on things is that when I'm with my beloved, we are creating our holy trinity. It's
Yeah.
him, it's me, and it's also the divine.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so much electricity and like communion that's available in partnered sex. Like, it is so divine. And, obviously I as a single person, I am doing the pandemic like Tinder pandemic style, like where I'm like, hey, let's meet outside, let's have a fire, let's wear our masks, let's get to know each other, we can get tested before we make out.
Or
And
are you teaching classes on this? Because you should.
I
I'm serious.
certainly talk
As a
about it.
relationship coach, people keep asking me about this. I don't have that kind of an answer for them. This is great. You should model that stuff.
Oh no, I also do relationship coaching and sex coaching. But the thing is, I talk about it all the time, like, because I'm always talking about my own story in sexuality, as we all do, right? And of course, my guests are almost always more interesting because they're doing things that are so wild and so edgy. And I'm fairly actually vanilla when it comes to San Francisco people.
Guilty as charged.
Right?
Even as a former pro dom, I'm actually not that kinky.
Right. And then you're like, well, actually, when you really know what kink is, then you're like, actually, it's just kind of vanilla. Yeah, but it's fun to at least know where the edges are, like be like, oh, like for me, if it wasn't for Sexploration with Monica, I wouldn't know about female ejaculation. And I wouldn't know about the things that I like in BDSM, which is, I love electrical play. I love the violet wand. I like piercing, which who knew that I would enjoy being pierced. I love being set on fire. Pardon?
Oh, I said there's a lot of endorphins released.
Exactly. It's the endorphins. And I think it's about the safe container to really explore the intensity, the intensity of like all of that sensation. And, I'm not so into pain, but every now and then I can find something like spanking that isn't setting off my, oh my God, that hurts, please stop doing that, and is so intense that I'm high. Like Polly Glamorous of Kinky Salon gave me the most amazing spanking that afterwards I was so high. It was, and you just wouldn't have had that experience,
Spanking
had you
getting
not.
spanked always puts me in a good mood.
Right?
Yeah.
I personally prefer the thuddy rather than the slappy, but she had a slappy that was very transcendent, and so I honor her.
Yeah. That's great. Well, before we go, give us the way that they can find your radio station, and also just call out the call letters for the station that you're on so that they can find you on the dial too.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So, so in my other radio life, I do work for KQED, but I don't talk about sex.
But maybe who knows? I'm sure you're going to get
when they're ready. I'm so ready.
They'll come over there and listen to it, even though you're not talking about sex.
Yeah. So, I'm on call. So mostly nights and weekends at KQED, which is 91.1 in San Francisco. And then you can always find Sexploration with Monica. So it's Sexploration. So like exploration, only with an S, Sexploration with Monica. And you can find it with Sexploration with Monica, but it's also Monika, which is my name. So sexplorationwithmonica.com. And, all the things. I'm on Pinterest and Instagram, and so Radio Free Yourself is my Instagram handle, and doing the Facebook thing and all of its social media. So
I think you're still posting the Sex Talk Radio Network too, right?
Oh, and the Sex Talk Radio Network.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So so I go to iTunes on the RSS feed, and then I go to Sex Talk Radio Network. So yeah, it's all, you try to do it all.
Oh yeah, you and me both trying to do it all. Monica, you're such a delight. I love how many rape survivors could actually get together and talk about the trauma of sexual assault and still have such a joyful relationship with sexuality.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to believe that every survivor gets to do it in their own way, whatever makes them feel safe. Like, I hope that they find a way to make sexuality healing for them. And I know it's a journey, right? And I wasn't ready right away. And this happened to me, what, 20 years ago, a long time ago.
Right.
And, still, right? We do have trouble where we freeze up a little bit and don't communicate clearly, and we feel kind of icky and we need to communicate after an experience. But luckily those are like less and less and less happening. So as long as we're able to remain in our bodies, remain centered in the moment, and able to communicate what we're a yes and what we're a no to, we can take care of ourselves better. So we don't.
Yes, and I just, for any sexual assault survivors of any gender who happen to be watching this program, I just want to make sure that there's absolutely fabulous resources out there. After my encounter with the serial rapist, I actually got a lot of help from San Francisco War, Women Against Rape.
Oh,
They actually
yeah.
came to my deposition.
Yeah.
So it's so important as survivors that we don't do this alone, that we get the
Yeah.
therapy and go to the support groups, and be sure to check out things like Women Against Rape.
Yeah.
War is the short for that. And also
Yeah.
RAINN.
Yeah, exactly.
RAINN.
RAINN.
Oh, that's right. It's two N's, not two I's.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always get that mixed up.
Oh,
but
no worries.
yeah, I'm going to
Yeah.
post all those links at the bottom of this so that people have access to that.
Sweet. Yeah.
Like,
No,
well,
there's definitely, as long as you can talk about your experience to one person and then start to open up a little bit more and more as you feel safer, that way you're not going to be locked away in this room in your mind with the brain weasels munching away, listening to your toxic inner voices about how you did it wrong, because you didn't. You made it through. You're good. Now it's time for you to heal.
Yeah, when it's time to heal. And Monica and I are all about sexual joy on the other side.
Yeah. And we can do it. You can do it.
Yes, you got to have a firm no to have a meaningful
That's right.
yes.
Got to have some good boundaries. Good boundaries make good fences make good neighbors.
Oh, they sure do. All right, Monica. Thanks again for gracing the shame-free zone with your
I'm so excited to be on the shame-free zone.
presence. Yes, you're just such a bundle of joy.
So fun. Thank you.